Hey everybody, welcome on already the fifth Sunday of Lent, which means the following Sunday is already Palm Sunday and Easter. I keep track of Lent because it always seems so long, but here we are. And last week we had the healing of the blind man. Before that was the woman at the well. And now we sort of come to the climax, the great miracle, the raising of Lazarus. And that's from the Gospel of John, chapter 11. Now a man was ill, Lazarus from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary is one who had anointed the Lord with perfumed oil and dried his feet with her hair. It was her brother Lazarus who was ill. So the sisters sent word to him, saying, Master, the one you love is ill. When Jesus heard this, he said, This illness is not to end in death, but is for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that he was ill, he remained for 2 days in the place where he was. Then after this he said to his disciples, Let us go back to Judea. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just trying to stone you, and you want to go back there? Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in a day? If one walks during the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if one walks at night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. He said this and told them, Our friend Lazarus is asleep, but I'm going to awaken him. So the disciples said to him, Master, if he's asleep, he will be saved. But Jesus was talking about his death, while they thought that he meant ordinary sleep. So when Jesus said to them clearly, Lazarus has died, and I'm glad for you that I was not there, that you may believe. Let us go to him. So Thomas, called Didymus, said to his fellow disciples, Let us go also to die with him. When Jesus arrived, he found Lazarus already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, only about 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him, but Mary, she sat at home. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, Your brother will rise. Martha said to him, I know he will rise on the resurrection on the last day. Jesus told her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even if he dies, will live. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, Yes, Lord. I have come to believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, the one who is coming into the world. When she had said this, she went and called her sister, Sister Mary secretly, saying, The teacher is here and is asking for you. As soon as she heard this, she rose quickly and went to him. For Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still where Martha had met him. So when the Jews who were with her in the house comforting her saw Mary get up quickly and go out, they followed her, presuming that she was going to the tomb to weep there. When Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said to him, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. When Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come with her weeping, he began perturbed and deeply troubled and said, Where have you laid him? They said to him, Sir, come and see. And Jesus wept. So the Jews said, See how he loved him? But some of them said, Could he not, the one who opened the eyes of a blind man, have done something so that this man would not have died? So Jesus, perturbed again, came into the tomb, and it was a cave, and a stone lay across it. Jesus said, Take away the stone. Martha, the dead man's sister, said to him, Lord, by now there will be a stench. He has been dead for 4 days. Jesus said to her, Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone, and Jesus raised his eyes and said, Father, I thank you for hearing me. I know that you always hear me. Because of the crowd I have said this, that they may believe that you sent me. And when he had said this, he cried out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, tied hand and foot with burial bands. His face was wrapped in a cloth. So Jesus said to them, Untie him and let him go. Now many of the Jews had been come to Mary, had seen what he had done, and began to believe in him. And that's the gospel of the Lord. It's a lengthy gospel, evidently, powerful gospel. If I make a suggestion, you get a chance, go on YouTube, and if you wish, and put the raising of Lazarus from Jesus of Nazareth. Remember Jesus of Nazareth? If you're old enough, it was out in the mid-70s, I believe. It was on TV. Remember, it was like Palm Sunday to Easter Sunday. They cut it down in 2 parts, the life of Jesus. To me, it was excellent. And still from this day, I remember this scene. It's powerful. You hear the force of Jesus' voice, Lazarus, come out. The strength of conviction. Typically, we don't hear Jesus speaking, in such strength like that, but he did. So you really want to get a feel for what it may have been like. Check that out. Go on YouTube, The Raising of Lazarus, Jesus of Nazareth. I think it put in good perspective this whole scene you could picture in your mind. And so Jesus had friends, Lazarus, Martha, and Mary. Now, of course, the apostles were his friends, but somehow I think they were work friends, mission friends. Martha, Mary, and Lazarus were simply friends. They were not part of his, that in-group of the ministry. I'm sure they went with him. I'm sure they spoke about him. But it was a house for him to go to. He would visit with them, and I guess the place was, as we say, to let your hair down, to relax. They fed him probably and just took it easy, took a break. So it was great to have a place to go. And they loved him, and they knew that he was always welcome there. What a blessing for him. Now, interesting, I want to speak about my man Thomas, being my namesake. He always gets a bum rap, doesn't he, of denying Christ because he wasn't there. But I like to highlight what he said in this gospel. They thought that going back where his enemies were after him and looked, there's a good chance that they would then seize him and put Jesus to death. Thomas said out loud, let us too go that we may die with him. So at least at this moment, though it didn't prove true on Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Thomas was willing to lay his life down. And so I want to mention that because I'm a Thomas of my namesake. He did speak up. Anyway, in order to visualize what the scene must take place in a Jewish house of mourning was like. Normally in Palestine, because of the climate, burial followed death as quickly as possible. Usually it could be that same day because they didn't have all the, they didn't have funeral homes. And I think the Jews knew also how germs could spread. So therefore, bury the body, the stench, the decay. So really, I think even today, Jews don't really have, like we have, 3 days. They do it right, and then, they bury right away. And then I understand correctly, they have what you call a shiva, when people come to the house and to visit with the family who lost a loved one. But the burial has already taken place, and they just sit and have food and just sort of, offer solace and friendship. So that still exists today. And there was a time when the funeral was exceedingly costly thing. It was so here in this country too, until we have cremation now, and most people go that route because of the expense. Anyway, the finest spices and ointments were used to anoint the body. The body itself was clothed in those magnificent robes. All kinds of valuables were buried in the tomb along with the body. Man, by midway through the 1st century, all this had become a ruinous expenditure. You can imagine. It's quite expensive. And then to leave all those valuables, you and I probably scratch our heads. Why would you leave it in the tomb? No one can, use it. So naturally, no one wished on such an occasion to be outdone by his neighbor. Now there's competition to who can bury the loved one in a greater fashion. And the wrappings and robes which the body was covered and the treasures left in the tomb became even more expensive. They probably dressed better in their death than they did when they were alive. The matter had become almost an intolerable burden which no one liked to change. That is, until the advent of the famous rabbi called Gamaliel II. He gave orders that he was to be buried in the simplest possible linen robe, and so he broke the extravagance of funeral customs. To this day, Jewish funerals, a cup is drunk to Rabbi Gamaliel, who rescued the Jews from their own ostentatious extravagance. I don't know if Jews in this country do that. Perhaps the strict Jews, they offer a little drink. The Rabbi Gamaliel had the wisdom and insight to put an end to that. So there, from this time on, the body was wrapped in a simple linen dress and was sometimes called by a very beautiful name, but the traveling dress. The traveling dress, meaning, we were traveling to eternal life, heaven. Anyways, many people, if possible, attended the funeral. Everyone who could was supposed, in courtesy and respect, to join the procession on its way. I experienced that more so when you see procession cars, right, at the funerals, correct? So that's probably part of the process. If you can, you go to the cemetery. But I remember being in Bahamas and I actually walked to the cemetery, the long line. And there's some was singing, a lot of wailing, a lot of crying. They really get into it. In fact, the one funeral I remember the funeral director or the priest said that one time the woman just jumped into the grave. And she was holding onto the coffin and said, "What do we do?" He told the priest told the funeral director, "Start shoveling dirt. She'll get out." Sure enough, it worked. But anyway, I divest. So, anyway, to join the procession, one curious custom was that the woman walked first. It was held that since women by the first sin brought death in the world, they ought to lead mourners to the tomb. So in this procession, and the exception here, the woman was ahead of the line. At the tomb, memorial speeches were sometimes made. Everyone was expected to express the deepest sympathy, and on leaving the tomb, others stood in two long lines while the principal mourners passed between them. But there was this very wise rule. The mourners were not to be tormented by idle and uninvited talk. They were to be left at that moment alone with their sorrow. Makes sense. So we still have that, there's still that same procession. Sometimes at the funerals, the family, host family will be waiting in the vestibule, and as people file out of the church, like a wedding, they will offer their condolences. But sometimes we have a reception, so that may not be the case. But there's no reception, and they just go through and they speak. And it's good to keep in mind, no uninvited, idle talk. Because sometimes, I have to tell you, I'm outside waiting for the body to be brought to the hearse. Sometimes funeral directors, someone else will make chit-chat. I'm thinking this, and I actually sometimes make a little joke and they're laughing. You don't do that. Whether you're emotionally involved or not. Out of respect for the mourners, you don't don't laugh, or even if something's funny, you don't do that. You don't talk about last night's game. Someone has lost a loved one, and we stand in respect as they did here. Anyway, in this whole dialogue, we're moved by Martha's great words. "I know quite well that he will rise in the general election on the last day." Now, that's quite a saying. One of the strangest things in Scripture is the fact that the saints of the Old Testament had practically no belief in any real life after death. In the early days, the Hebrews believed that the soul of every man and woman, good and bad alike, went to Sheol. Sheol was wrongly translated for hell, for it was not a place of torture. It was the land of the shades. All alike went there, and they lived a vague, shadowy, strengthless, joyless, ghostly kind of life. So there was no reward for those who, lived a godly life, and no really punishment for those who didn't. They're all the same. This belief of by far the greater part of the Old Testament. This was the strong, as it's mentioned, through most of the Old Testament, this is what they believed. In death there is no remembrance of thee, in Sheol, who can give thee praise? Anyway, Jesus saw Mary and all the sympathizing crowd weeping. Remember, this would be no gentle shedding of tears. It'd be almost hysterical wailing and shrieking. For it was the Jewish point of view that the more unstrained the weeping, the more honor it paid to the dead. As I said, there have been some places, some funerals, where they just naturally want to yell, because the more you cry, it says, "Look how much I love my deceased, my loved one." So if you didn't cry or wail, and this, remember, I think it was in the Bahamas, they had to do that to prove that they had a great love. Because if you didn't wail or cry, well, I guess he wasn't loved that much. So we come to the last scene. Once again, we are shown the picture of Jesus wrung with anguish. And Jesus wept. Jesus wept. That's how much he loved him. Wow. The Son of God could weep would be almost beyond belief, that the Son of God would weep. And here we are, Jesus, emotionally moved, tormented, perturbed, and he wept. Now picture the Palestinian tomb. It was either a natural cave or hewn out of a rock. There was an entrance in which where the body was first laid. Beyond that was a chamber, usually about 6 feet long, 9 feet wide, 10 feet high. There were usually 8 shelves cut in the rock, 3 on each side and 2 on the wall facing the entrance. And on these shelves, the bodies were laid, so there were multiple bodies will be in this one gravesite. The bodies were enveloped in linen, but the hands and feet were swathed in bandaged like wrappings, and the head was wrapped separately. The tomb had no door, but in front of the opening ran a groove in which was set a great stone like a cartwheel that was rolled across the entrance to seal the grave. And we see that with the burial of Jesus. A lot of replicas of it, and after we have at our church on Easter, it's a big rock, a round rock, and placed in front of the tomb. So that was very common. Anyway, Jesus now asked the stone to be moved. Martha could think of only one reason for opening the tomb. Jesus wished to look on the face of his dead friend for the last time. So she's not expecting in resurrection. She thinks, well, he wants to pay his last respects. Martha could see no consolation there. She pointed out Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. The point is this: it was Jewish belief that the spirit of the departed hovered around his tomb for 4 days, seeking an entrance again to his body. But after 4 days, the spirit finally left the face of the body, and so the body was decayed, and you could not recognize him. So Jesus waited for 4 those days because you might think the spirit was there, but the spirit would have been departed. And Jesus calls him with that beautiful voice, Lazarus, come out. And I think Jesus speaks to us, come out. Not just at a moment of death, but even when we're alive, things that hold us back, things that have wrapped us, our memories, our pain, our hurt, our failures. And Jesus says, untie him, let him go. So Jesus came to give us life, not just the next life, but even here now. I've come that they may have life, have it to the full. And so Sunday I'd like to probably preach on that. What is, wrapping us down? What do we hold that destroys our life? Jesus wants to set us free from all those things, that we may live freely as a daughter and son of God. God bless you.